I've been writing, I said, for months now, in the notebook. You know that. I know, she said. I've seen it on the table. You haven't read it? I said. No, she said. I wouldn't. A small pause. You know I wouldn't. My Playful Wife. Episode 20. The Monsoon. Written by Mia. The monsoon came early that year, which everyone in Delhi treated as both a gift and a mystery, the way the city treats any unearned mercy. There's nothing quite like a Delhi monsoon for reminding you of the basics, that the city has been surviving its summers for centuries, long before anyone alive was here to doubt it would, that the heat which seemed, 2 weeks before, genuinely unsurvivable, a thing that could not be borne for one more day, was in fact entirely survivable, had been survived, was already receding into the unreal way that suffering recedes once it stops. And that what follows the impossible is, very often, something beautiful, that the same sky which had pressed down white and merciless for 2 months could turn, in an afternoon, into the thing that saved you. I had spent a year learning, slowly and against my will, that the unbearable is mostly a story you tell yourself about the present, and that the present keeps moving regardless of the story. The monsoon arrives every year to teach the same lesson to a city that forgets it every summer. I was, that June, in a frame of mind to receive the lesson gratefully. The first rain came on a Tuesday evening. I was on the balcony when the sky went that particular green-gray, the color of something about to happen, a bruised and pregnant color, the light going strange and underwater the way it does just before, and I felt the pressure change in my ears and the first cool exhalation of wind come up out of nowhere, carrying the smell, the unmistakable mineral smell of rain about to land on dust that has been baking for 2 months. I called to Saloni. I didn't have to say why. She heard the why in my voice and came, fast, the way you come for the first rain, and she stood beside me at the railing, and we watched it arrive. It arrived the way it always arrives, and the way it is somehow always astonishing. First the smell, then the sound. The first fat drops on the broad leaves of the neem tree below us, individual and countable for a moment, talk, 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 and then the full weight of it all at once, the sky simply opening, the rain coming down in ropes, the temperature dropping 10 degrees in the space of a breath, the dust laid flat, the whole exhausted city sighing out 2 months of held heat in a single instant. We got slightly wet before we moved inside. The rain blew in under the balcony's edge, and neither of us stepped back from it. We stood and took it, the cool of it, the relief of it on skin that had been hot for weeks, and neither of us moved immediately to go in, because there are mercies you do not flinch from when they finally come. I love this, she said. Her face turned up slightly into the spray, her eyes half closed. I know, I said. She stood a moment longer, and then she turned and went inside, leaving me to it, the way she does. She takes her portion of a thing, and then leaves you yours. I stayed at the railing alone for another minute, watching the rain hammer the neem and the parked scooters and the empty street, watching the gutters fill and the children somewhere 2 buildings over run shrieking out into it. And I thought about the year, because the rain made me think about the year, the way everything that arrives after a long, unbearable thing makes you think about the unbearable thing it has ended. What follows the impossible is usually something beautiful. I had not believed that a year ago on a plastic stool in the dark. The rain on the neem was the evidence. I went in wet and did not mind being wet. The monsoon had its own rhythm, and we moved back into it gratefully. The evenings changed. The balcony, which the summer had made uninhabitable, became again the best room in the flat. The temperature bearable, the air washed, and carrying the green smell of a city that has remembered it has trees. We moved back outside. We started having dinner there on the weekends, the two of us with our plates on our knees and the city below doing its washed, gentle, post-rain version of itself. The harsh edges rinsed off everything, the lights smeared and soft in the wet air. Saloni had started a new project. A second collection for Kaveri, smaller than Distance, more personal, a tighter and quieter body of work. The success of the first had done what success does. It had created demand, a waiting list of people wanting things that did not yet exist. And more than that, it had redefined for her what was possible, had moved the ceiling up so that she now reached, unconsciously, for things she would not have dared reach for a year before. But she worked on this one with a different quality, and the difference was the most interesting thing I had watched in months. The first collection had been made under the pressure of proving something, to Kaveri, to the buyers, to herself, to the part of her that had spent years being competent and wondering if she was only ever going to be competent. This one she made from the other side of that question. The proving was done. What was left was the thing itself, made for its own sake, by a woman who no longer had to wonder whether she could. There is a confidence that comes only after you have already done the impossible thing once, and she had it now, and it changed the way her hands moved. I watched her work. I was always that Monsoon, watching her work from the doorway, from the next room, the witnessing that had become one of the central pleasures of my life, and I thought about how much a single person contains. How little of it is ever visible in ordinary time. You can live beside someone for years, can think you know the dimensions of them, and the truth is you have seen perhaps a tenth, the part that surfaces in the daily transaction of a shared life. The rest is down there in the dark, vast, mostly unwitnessed, surfacing only under particular pressures, grief, or rain, or a commission that asks for everything. I had been married to a tenth of Saloni for 3 years and called it a marriage. I was married, now, to far more of her, and I knew it was still not all, knew there were chambers I would never enter, and the knowing did not trouble me. It had stopped seeming like a deprivation and started seeming like a promise, that there would always be more of her, that I would not finish learning her, that the well had no bottom I would ever reach. There was a weekend deep in the monsoon when it rained for 3 days without meaningfully stopping, and the city gave up resisting and simply became a wet thing, and we gave up too and stayed in. It was, I think, one of the best weekends of my life, and almost nothing happened in it. That is the kind of weekend it was. The rain came down. We did not go out. We cooked slowly, the elaborate things made possible again by the cool, and ate them late, and slept in the afternoons the way you are only allowed to sleep in the afternoons when the weather has absolved you of all obligation. Saloni worked in stretches and stopped in stretches. I read and wrote and watched the rain and watched her. On the Sunday, she called me into the workroom. This was not nothing. She did not call me into the workroom. The workroom was hers, entered by invitation only, on the rare occasions she had decided something was ready to be seen. I went in. She had 3 pieces of the new collection on the rail, and she stood beside them with an expression I couldn't immediately read. Not the pride of the show, something more exposed than pride. "Look at them," she said, properly. "Tell me what you see. You have the vocabulary now. Use it." I looked properly, and after a while I began to see it, the thing she had called me in to find and could not say herself, the thing she needed me to discover on my own so that she would know it was actually there, and not only in her head. The first collection had been called Distance, and it had been the year seen from outside. Its shape, its arc, the thing that looked like closing and was opening. This one was the year from the inside. There was a piece in a gray that was exactly the gray of a particular bad morning. There was a seam in the second one that almost tore the fabric and then held, and I didn't have words for what it was, but I knew it. I had lived inside it. And the third was unmistakably about the two of us. It had the rose-dark color in it again, just a thread of it, run through a darker ground, the old wound woven small into something larger that carried it. "This is us," I said. "This is the year. You're making the year." "Yes," she said, very quiet. "The way I'm writing it," I said. "You're doing the same thing. You with cloth, me with the notebook. We're both just trying to get it down, to understand it by making it into something we can look at." She nodded. Her eyes were bright. "I didn't realize I was doing it," she said, "until it was half made. And then I couldn't stop. I'd reach for a color, and it would be a color from then, from the worst of it. My hands knew before I did." She looked at the rail. "I was afraid to show you. I thought you might feel exposed, that I'd taken our private thing and made it into garments for strangers to buy." "No," I said. "It's the opposite. Strangers will buy them and never know. They'll just feel something and not have the word for it." I almost laughed. We're very good at making things people feel and don't have the word for. She laughed too, then, wetly, and leaned into me, and we stood in the workroom in the rain light looking at the year hung on a rail, and I understood that we had been, all this time, working the same seam from opposite ends, she in fabric, I in ink, both of us trying to turn the unbearable into something that could be held and looked at and survived. We made chai and took it to the workroom doorway and sat on the floor. We had become, that year, a couple who ended up on floors, as though the important things could only be said below a certain height, and looked at the three pieces while the rain went on outside. "Kaveri will ask what it's about," Saloni said. "She always asks. She'll hold one up to the light and ask." "What will you tell her?" She thought about it. "That it's about a year," she said. "I'll let her find the rest." She found distance in one look. She'll find this. People who see and people always do. She turned her cup in her hands. "But I won't tell her it's us. That part's ours. She can have the year. She can't have us. The parts that are only yours to carry." Mira's sentence, surfacing months later in my wife's mouth in different words. It had become, without my noticing, one of the load-bearing beams of how we lived. The understanding that you could make a thing public and keep its heart private, hang the year on a rail in a South Delhi boutique and still have it be, in the only way that mattered, no one's but ours. "Come out of here," she said finally, when the chai was gone. "You'll start composing notebook sentences at me. I can see it happening. Your face does a thing." My face does not do a thing. It does. It's doing it now. She hauled me up off the floor by both hands, and we left the year hanging on its rail and went back out into the rest of the rainy Sunday. The cooking, the reading, the sleeping, the ordinary surface of a life under which all that depth just went on quietly being there, holding everything up. One evening she looked up from the sketchbook and put it down. "Talk to me," she said. "I've been in my own head for 3 hours. I need to be pulled out. Talk to me." "About what?" I said. "Anything," she said. "Tell me something I don't know about you. There must be things. After all of this, there must still be things." I thought about it. There were not many left. That was the strange truth of the year, that we had been emptied out toward each other so thoroughly that the reservoir of unsaid things had run low. But there was one. "I've been writing," I said, "for months now. In the notebook. You know that." I know, she said. I've seen it on the table. You haven't read it, I said.
No, she said.
I wouldn't. A small pause. You know I wouldn't. I know, I said. I've been writing about this year. About all of it. From the kitchen. From the beginning. I've been trying to get it down, what happened, what it did to me, who I was before, and who I turned into. The whole of it. She went very still. The rain came down outside, steady now, the night kind, the kind that has settled in to fall all night. Not to publish, I said quickly, because I saw a question move across her face. Not for anyone. Nobody will ever read it. It's not that. I'm not making us into a story for other people. I'm just trying to understand it myself. The writing is how I think. I can't think a thing all the way through until I've written it down. That's all it is. A man trying to understand his own life by writing it where he can look at it. Do you, she said, understand it? More than I did, I said. Less than I will. It's a moving target. Every time I think I've got it down, a month goes by, and I understand it differently and have to write it again. I don't think I'll ever finish. I think it's the kind of thing you write your whole life and never finish, and the not finishing is the point. She looked at me for a long moment in the monsoon light, the lamp and the gray, wet window behind her, her face doing the thing it does when she is deciding how much to ask for. Can I read it someday? She said. It was not a small question. We both knew it was not a small question. In that notebook were things I had never said to her and might never say aloud. The worst of what the year had made possible in me, the darkest stretches of the plastic stool nights, the things a person thinks in the pit of a thing like that and is ashamed of later. To let her read it would be to let her all the way in, into the last closed room, the one even our remarkable honesty had not opened. Someday, I said. Not yet. Okay, she said. She did not push. She never pushed. It was one of the ways she made it possible to give her things, the fact that she never grabbed for them. Someday. When you're ready. I'm not in a hurry. We have time. We have time, I agreed. She picked up the sketchbook again, but she looked at me once more before she went back down into it, a look that said she understood exactly what she had just asked for and exactly what I had just promised, and that the promise was enough, was more than enough, that the someday sitting out there in the future was its own kind of gift, a door I had agreed would open eventually, the agreeing as good for now as the opening. Outside, the rain. Inside, the two of us, in the ongoing work of knowing each other, the work that is no end, that is not a project to be completed but a practice to be kept, like the rain itself, arriving and arriving, washing the same city clean over and over, because clean is not a state you reach, but a thing you keep doing. That night I wrote in the notebook. She asked if she could read it someday. I said someday, not yet. She didn't push. There is a last room I haven't let her into, the plastic stool nights, the worst of what I thought. I will let her in eventually, not because she needs to see it, but because a marriage should have no permanently locked rooms in the end. Just not yet. The someday is a thing we now both own. The rain came early this year. What follows the impossible is usually something beautiful. I have the evidence now. I'm sitting in it. To be continued in episode 21, Letters to Bengaluru.
Simbolo di copyright mia.
All rights reserved. That was episode 20 of my Playful Wife. If this story is staying with you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
Air mia.
Thank you for listening.